Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my VermiBag Mini, and I guess there's this whole thing about first impressions, and as far as this check-in goes, my first impression is what is going on with all these deceased worms on top of the plastic. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe there's something with the weather. I don't know, but I just spent a few minutes even sweeping up a whole bunch of dead wormies that I found on the floor. And I mean, it's something that I only did a couple weeks ago. And it's not something I feel like I've got to do very frequently either, but once in a while I've got these instances where the worms just start to run, and, well, I don't know. Don't know what's causing it. If I knew, I would, certainly try to remedy the matter for the sake of the little wormies, and I guess this stuff can just stay within the bin. It'll get broken down by the mites and other helper creatures. I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this top covering of newspaper we gave them to hang out on. It's just so funny how they want to get together into these little groups. I usually don't go looking under the folds of a piece of paper like this, but I figured, what the heck, let's take a peek, and I was a little surprised to see how many worms have made themselves at home down here in this piece of paper. But I don't think we've got to evict them all. Why don't we allow this piece of paper to sort of retain its nice shape that I gave it when I created it. And let's not damage it any further. It is in nice enough shape that I think it'll go right back in as a good top covering to continue in that function. I did actually peek under the plastic to see what kind of shape that thing was in, because I kind of suspected that it might be getting chewed up by the worms, and it's surprising that it isn't with all the worms that were hanging out on it. So I'm seeing a little hint of this unusual moldy stuff that we've seen here and there down here in the bag once in a while. I don't really recall if we saw much of it or any of it during the last check-in, but I know that in other previous check-ins we've seen this stuff growing around the outer edge. I'm just assuming that it's some sort of a fungus or mold, and I'm not worried about it because I don't think it's going to cause any issues. At this point, I'm just sort of going around the perimeter to see what else I could see as far as that stuff, if there's any other blooms of it. It seems to be over here as well. I think I remember seeing it for the first time perhaps a month and a half ago or thereabouts, and it was just this one little section of it, and it sort of kept moving around the bin, and I've not allowed myself to get alarmed about it. And I think if there was an issue with it, then the viewers would have said something by now to clue me in on the potential harm. But I've not caught wind of anything along those lines, so I'm assuming the stuff is relatively benign and harmless from the perspective of the worms. Well, it was interesting kind of exploring a little bit. I just figured I would take a quick peek here at the level. It's so weird because I think the system's level was right around there at the bottom of this window when it started, and it just never seems to rise. Even after 432 days in service. It seemed like an easy enough number, but I did write it down nonetheless, along with some other stats. So why don't we just share a little bit of info here before we continue. 432-day-old system, 34 feedings so far, 35th feeding going in now, with the last check-in being 12 days ago. I've got some coffee, some used coffee that's getting a little bit moldy, and here we've got an assortment of some bits of celery, some tomato, peels of orange, even little bits of mushroom here and there. So hopefully they'll enjoy that. Oh, looks like my glove just disintegrated. So I guess we won't be using this glove anymore. Well, after 12 days, I'm assuming that the stuff we gave them last time, which as I recall was just a relatively meager portion of various veggies, frozen, stuff that came out of my freezer, just like what we're giving them today. After 12 days, it seems like the sort of stuff that you would find very little, if any, leftovers of. Although there are usually, you know, skins and peels and seeds and stems and bits and pieces of the stuff that, for the most part, goes quick, but occasionally has portions of it that are a little bit slower going as far as the breakdown process. And like some of these things that I encounter at every check-in, I don't know if it's necessary to describe them all, but here are bits and pieces of a gourd. Those little mini pumpkins, decorative mini pumpkins. Here's one of the pumpkin stems that are in here. And this is like the that connector at the end of the bunch of bananas with a number of banana stems hanging off of it. Holding up pretty good, so this must have gone in pretty recently. And if I'm not mistaken, there are other slow composting old objects, like here's another pumpkin stem, but the stem off of a much smaller pumpkin, and very fragile too. I mean, it just cracked right there in my hand. So considering the size of it, I wonder how much longer we're going to be able to continue to identify it as a piece of pumpkin stem before it starts to just shatter into a gazillion little tiny bits so the wormies can feast on the stuff. I'm liking the moisture level in here, you know. Very nice. That plastic top covering seems to be doing a nice job keeping the system's moisture down. I've got my prepared bedding today, and we could sprinkle some of that in as a foundation below today's feeding. Here's another pumpkin stem. I've been sort of transitioning from a mindset about the pumpkin stems that say don't help them along and just let them break down at their own natural pace. Kind of switching over to a different mindset, I guess. Thinking that, hey, maybe if there is a opportunity here and there to help the pumpkin stems along to the finish line, then, you know, take those opportunities and provide the help. So maybe the only reason for that is that we're at this point maybe a month away from the Halloween season, and in the back of my mind I suppose I'm anticipating an influx of more pumpkin. It is that season again. So maybe in the back of my mind I'm thinking, you know, it's time to get rid of all the old pumpkin from last year and make room for the new pumpkin stuff. So it wouldn't be too surprising if I were to start thinking that way. Man, these bundles of newspaper, I think, you know, I did kind of burn through the video from last time, and I can't remember if it was this bag or if it was the outdoor worm bag, but somewhere I bundled their food into these little I don't know, I refer to them as either being possibly ravioli or wonton. I can remember what I said in the video, but I can't remember which bin it was that we fed when we did that. But it could have been here with those big huge chunks of leftover newspaper, unless maybe I just took the lazy route in terms of applying bedding and just took some newspaper and crumpled up and tossed it in, and at that, you know, and with that method, you're going to have to kind of wait a little while before stuff like this can break down. But I think perhaps another thing we could do is just spread it out and not let it just be a lump, a pile, crumpled up little spitball of paper sitting there, unable to break down because it's just a big mound, just a big clump. Perhaps if we sort of spread it out to be just a single layer everywhere, it'll get much more exposure to worm traffic that way. And I've even got a couple extra pieces here left over, but that seems like one possible way for us to see this stuff getting consumed a little bit more quickly. So I'm throwing in a little bit of my moldy coffee. And maybe we could throw in a little bit of veggie matter. But I figured maybe we would just keep going with this with a little bit more distribution of this material. And by doing it this way, my guess is that by next check-in there'll be no trace of it left. As opposed to now, still 12 days after it was put in here, most of it remaining very intact. That's looking pretty good. But, oh, you know, one thing I always manage to overlook is the restoration of the old slow composting food items back down into the feeding zone before we get done. So I'm glad I remembered to do that, because I would like to see that stuff nicely submerged. I think I'm going to come in now with my prepared bedding, and oh, you know what? Another thing. Oops. Okay. I thought we already applied the last of the food. I don't know why, but the reason we're here is to feed, so let's make sure we get all this yummy stuff down into play. And then we can come in with the ongoing supply of bedding to cover up with, and maybe even a little bit more coffee, because I got plenty over here. Alright, save a bit for the next system that might want some. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So before we start covering up, I'm going to grab just a little bit more bedding, and I'm going to keep this bedding on hand, because at the end I'd also like to do a nice little application of sort of top dressing of bedding. Not so much specific to the feeding zone, but just one that gives the worms some material to explore out on the top surface and start breaking in. And then future check-ins and stuff will just get blended in. But I assume that it'll also kind of help as a little bit of a moisture barrier to help keep the system's moisture down within the bed rather than having an opportunity to sneak out. Although with that plastic covering, I think we're pretty well protected. It's just that I see so many worm channels where the people are just so generous with the bedding, and I think to myself, you know, I gotta start doing that. So I recently prepared a whole bunch of bedding, so I don't have to be skimpy about it. And you know, before we get any further too, I'm gonna put in some of this crushed Mosquito Dunks. In the past, I had always prepared the Mosquito Dunks as a solution in water and applied it as a spray. But more recently, I've figured, you know, I'm just going to take the little Mosquito Dunks and grind it up into this really fine consistency and start sprinkling it down into the system this way. Somehow, I don't know if it's possible that it might be coming in at a greater concentration with greater strength. It's kind of my hope. That's the reason I'm doing it that way, to see if we can finally get some relief from having flying insects hanging out all over the place. So now my bedding that I just put in here, it is prepared with moisture, so the stuff is damp. If the worms find themselves wandering off this top covering newspaper, they will end up in material that is damp, so there's no need to worry about the well-being of the wormies. They're going to be just fine if they start to go down to try to get a little bit of that delicious feeding we gave them. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.